Hello, everyone, and thank you for making it across the city on a rainy day in the evening on a Thursday. It's always a pleasure to do these events at BIC, and we really appreciate all of you making it this far. This is part of a Let's Talk Climate Change series that we do at Azim Premji University. One of the focus areas of this university is climate change, along with public health, education, and a few other areas. And we believe that climate change is something that is becoming of increasing importance for India. And we don't have enough public conversations about this. So our effort with this Let's Talk Climate Change series is to bring issues and experts to public attention through these small, very well curated talks with intense discussions. And this talk and the Let's Talk Climate Change series, as well as a number of environment related podcasts and videos that we have, are all on the Azim Premji University YouTube channel. So for instance, we have a series of talks on nature in our cities, where we talk to experts about nature in different parts of Indian cities. We have a talk series which is called Nature Writing for Children, and we do workshops and short courses on nature writing for children. So that's another series that you will find. We have a series called Ecographies, where in recently my colleague Shashwat interviewed Ruskin Bond and Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who are both icons for India, and you can find those up on the website. We have a series called Guardians of Our Forests, which you again can look at interviews with forest department officials and various other people working as guardians of forests across India. So do look at our YouTube channel, look at our podcast, look at the website. You'll get a sense of the flavor of things we do. In that aspect, it's a special pleasure to now move to the topic of today's talk and to welcome Professor Ruth DeFries, who we were trying to figure out today how long we've known each other, but we both think it's forever. A long-term colleague and friend, and more importantly, someone who's been doing phenomenal ground-up work, as well as eye-in-the-sky work from remote sensing for the past 40 to 50 years. She is, so Ruth DeFries is at Columbia University as the founding dean of Columbia's Climate School, has been working on issues of land cover change and remote sensing. And to give you a little bit of background, when I started doing remote sensing in '93, there was still, I think, maybe 5-10 women across the world working there. So probably, Ruth, when you started, maybe there were 2 or 3. So she's been working on land cover change using satellite remote sensing, and a real pioneer in this, like I said, several decades ago. And her work has looked at what drives people to cut down forests and plant agriculture, or reshape or create cities, or all kinds of decisions that are shaped around human decisions to change land use, what the impacts are on the climate, what the impact is on biophysical environment, and how all of this ultimately relates to desire for better life and for food, which is a driving focus also of today's talk. She has 2 books that I would encourage everyone to go out and read. One is The Big Ratchet, which talks about changes in the way humans and their relationship to the environment and well-being has changed over centuries. The second one is What Would Nature Do?, which is also a very thoughtful and interesting discussion of how ecosystems and ecosystem services are going to be essential to human resilience today. And in that context, millets is something she's been looking at for a very long time. The central Indian forest landscapes is a place that where she has a family home, but also has been working for a very long time on understanding how people deal with the forest, how migration is linked with urbanization, with climate change, and a number of very fascinating issues. But today's theme is specifically on millets, so let's listen to Professor DeFries talking to us about millets. Thank you.
Thank you, Harini, for that very nice and generous introduction, and I hope our friendship and work together goes on for many more decades. And thank you all for coming out this evening. As I'm sure you are aware, there is so much focus on millets as a way to increase climate resilience of food production in India, and also for its many nutritional benefits. So I'm sure you are very well aware of this push, and maybe you had millets for lunch. I'm looking forward to having millets for dinner. Karnataka, of course, is quite famous for ragi. So what I'd like to do today is dig in more about what this Millet Bonanza, this millet revival is all about, why it's so important, and I see it as a huge potential to bring climate resilience into food production and consumption in India, and look at some historical thinking about millets, and then looking forward to how we can realize this potential in the in the Millet Bonanza. But before we get into millets, I want to step back for a minute, and Harini had mentioned the book, The Big Ratchet, and that's a book that traces over time back to the domestication of agriculture, and even before that, about how humans have increased food production more and more and more. And every time we figure out a way to increase food production, it makes some kind of problem, like some kind of shortage in nutrients, or the need for pesticides to deal with pests in monoculture, some kind of problem, and then another solution emerges, which creates another problem. So here we are in this kind of cycle. So I take that as a sort of hopeful story, if we can have hope, that societies are continually adapting, learning, altering course when conditions change. So a condition that is changing now that's with us is created by the problem of burning fossil fuels for energy as a convenient source of energy, the problem created by the industrialized world. And the impact now is that climate change is very much with us, as I'm sure you all are aware. Records breaking around the world, and the unusual rainfall patterns that we're seeing in the monsoon. So we need to adapt, learn, and alter course while we do everything we can to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. So I see where we are as a pivot point in this endless process in societies of adapting, learning, and altering course as conditions change. So here we are in the International Year of the Millet, which was proposed to the United Nations by the government of India. We have millets all around us. We love millets. We can buy millets online in nice packaging and in grocery stores. We go into restaurants and have millets, and also very much traditional staple for many, many people. And again, Karnataka being famous for ragi. So it is quite the moment for millets. The question is, with all of this attention, what are the barriers, and can this be a pivot to improving climate resilience and also nutrition, to the extent that millets provide good nutrition, to be able to capitalize on this moment. So India is the largest producer of millets in the world, and that fact, despite that the production has been going down for the last decades, as we'll talk about in a moment. And what is so wonderful about the millets in India is that there are so many species, and within each species, so many varieties. And each geography has its own composition of millets. So there are the major millets that we're all quite familiar with, because they are the ones that have been more commercialized: ragi, bajra, jowar, grown in different parts of the country. And these millets have been in India for thousands of years, almost 5,000 years, and came to India from the semi-arid parts of Africa as people moved and traded and moved back and forth, as people have always done. And these are very important millets in India. And there are also such an incredible diversity, genetic diversity of small millets, which are very important and grown particularly in hilly parts of the country. And there's a lot more than is on this slide. We have the broomcorn millet, we have cogni, foxtail millet. Those came from China even before the millets that came from Africa. And then we have this wonderful array of millets which are native to India itself, were domesticated here in India. The Indian barnyard millet, kutki, my personal favorite, kodo, and those are the ones that are just a treasure trove of genetic diversity because they are native. So this idea of adapting and learning and changing course when conditions change is very much an issue for today, but has always been an issue in human history. So if we think about the Harappan civilization, what I'm showing you here, those squiggly lines, is data from sediment cores from lakes. So if you think of those sediment cores as layers, like a layer cake, laid down over time. So when you take a core, you can look back in time at what the climatic conditions were based on chemical isotopes and fossils. And in this case, what these sediment cores are showing us is that in the time of the height of the Harappan civilization, conditions were wetter than usual, and the Harappan civilization thrived. Highly sophisticated civilization, highly urbanized, equitable, known to be an equitable civilization. And to have such a sophisticated urban civilization requires surplus and production. And we see that that civilization thrived when conditions were wetter. Then what happened about 4,200 years ago is that worldwide conditions changed and went through a drought period. And that changed what people ate during the Harappan civilization. So we think about the wheat and barley as the staples for the Harappan civilization, but there are also millets that are found. So the wonderful work of archaeologists who do the painstaking analysis of the remnants left behind from people long ago. For example, at these sites, the archaeologists have found charred seeds from millets. The millets that came from Africa, the ones that came from China, native millets from India itself. And so there were, while wheat and barley were the main staples, there was this wider diversity of millets at that time. So the interesting thing that we see from this archaeological record is that as this global drought affected the Harappan civilization, as it affected civilizations that existed around the world at that time, we see in the record an increasing proportion of those millet seeds in the remnants dated with time. So in these two sites, for example, we see that the composition of the seeds became more and more reliant on millets. And that is quite sensible because we know that millets are very climate resilient. So of course the Harappan civilization, that highly urbanized Harappan civilization did not persist, but people did move and took their millets with them, moved to the east and moved throughout the subcontinent. So back then, there was this adaptation, learning, and changing course when conditions change. So that human process is very much with us, and we are in the same situation today. So we all think about millets as being climate resilient. What is it that actually makes millets climate resilient? Millets is a catch-all for many different species of grasses which produce these small seeds. So what makes them climate resilient is that they have a particular physiology. What we're looking at here is a cross-section of a leaf, very magnified, and you could see the stomate, the holes in the leaf. If you look very closely at a leaf, you will see those stomates. And those stomates are where the carbon dioxide comes in and the oxygen and the water go out in the process of photosynthesis that we all learned in biology class. So there are two main types of plants in the world, the C3 plants and the C4 plants. And the difference is that the C4 plants have evolved in semi-arid conditions and they have a particular mechanism where they can store the CO2 in an extra layer of cells, so they don't need to open their stomates as wide to bring in the CO2, so they lose less water. So that is what is making them require less water and climate resilient. So all millets are in this family of C4 plants, and the rice and the wheat that is so dominant in Indian production systems today and in consumption in diets are C3 plants. So it's quite expected that we would see the climate resilience in the millets. And because of that climate resilience and the nutrition that millets bring, millets were historically a mainstay, a staple in semi-arid regions of India. This is a report from the British Famine Commission that was undertaken following the horrendous series of famines in the late 19th century when millions and millions of people died due to the climate conditions, but also, of course, due to the callousness of the British and the extraction of grains from to other places. But at that time, we see in this report, I'm sure it's not highly accurate, but it does show us in red here that many semi-arid parts of the country, the major production was with millets. So millets are very much a part of the culture, part of the knowledge system, part of the history in many parts of the country. Now, what happened in those famines? Here, we're looking at this series of El Nino. So El Nino is a phenomena, again, another worldwide phenomena that changes the global circulation patterns due to warm waters in the Pacific Ocean, and it is a phenomenon that occurs roughly every 5 to 7 years. It has been with us for probably as long as humans have been around, and will continue to be with us. It was with us before climate change became an issue, before all the greenhouse gas emissions increased, and there's a long history of these ENSO El Nino events. So we see during those late 19th century famines, there were some particularly strong El Nino events. Now, of course, the social scientists will really have my neck, right, Harini, if I'm not very careful to say that famines are not completely climate driven, that they are created by human decisions and governance. But climate conditions can be a trigger to famines, as they were in this case. So we see these really tragic famines at the late 19th century, and we continue to see El Nino events occur. That's the red, when in the red, continue to occur throughout history, following those before and after those that period of famines. But we don't continue to see, thankfully, this scale of famines as occurred in the late 19th century. So there's been, of course, better transport, better distribution, better government trying to take care of people. So we don't see these kinds of famines today. And part of the reason is because during the Green Revolution, which started in the early 60s, the production of food incredibly increased immensely and outpaced, even on a per capita basis, population growth. So that's quite an achievement. So I know we could stay here all night talking about the pros and the cons of the Green Revolution, and I'm sure there are a lot of perspectives in this room on that question. We'll just leave it at the facts that the Green Revolution did increase food production, and that was due to the high-yielding varieties of rice, and wheat, with all kinds of environmental, social problems that came along with that. But what we see is, if we look at the area that is planted in different crops, starting in the mid-1960s, if we look at the kharif, the monsoon crops, rice area didn't increase all that much, although production increased quite a lot because yields increased. But we do see that the millets, those other lines at the top, decreased quite substantially. They really fell out, and they did not have the kind of research support, the extension support that the rice and wheat had. So at the beginning of the Green Revolution, millets were 40-something% overall of the area that's for cereal production, and by the time we get to the present day, it's less than 20%. So the millets really took a hit during the Green Revolution. And even in the Rabi season, winter season crops, jowar is one millet that can be grown in both seasons, and we see there also wheat increased phenomenally due to irrigation and other inputs, and the jowar also declined in its area of production. So the two big pushes are these two gentlemen here, younger versions of themselves. Norman Borlaug is no longer with us, but M.S. Swaminathan is still with us. Two people who were so pivotal in bringing the Green Revolution and the high-yielding wheat varieties and rice varieties to India. So here is M.S. Swaminathan, a much younger version of himself, and undeniably had a major impact on the course of food production in the country. Now, let's see, 50 years later, Swaminathan is now the biggest voice, I would say, for adapting, changing course, and relying more on millets and climate resilient, climate smart crops. He's saying that is the need of the hour. And he is certainly the one who has pushed this issue at very high levels successfully. So why is he saying that? This is a bit of an alarming graphic about what we might expect the recurrence of droughts to be in the future. Now, climate projections are only based on models, which we know are imperfect, and the monsoon is notoriously difficult to predict by climate models. I think you had another session on that topic. What we do know, or what the climate scientists do think will happen and is actually currently happening, is that overall rainfall increases, but becomes more erratic and variable and longer and intense, and longer dry spells in between. And also, with some certainty, the climate modelers tell us that we can expect an increase in temperature. So you take those two things together, an increase in temperature, which increases evaporation, and the increase in the length of dry spells, work together for this projection here of the increase in the recurrence of droughts. So what we're seeing here is the return period of droughts every 25 years. So how many times in a 25-year period we could expect to have a year of drought, and we see a lot of red spots popping up here. And this is for a mid-range scenario of greenhouse gas emissions, which we're kind of blowing past at this point, unfortunately. So this is, I like to be an optimist, but this really is quite alarming, and you could see why M.S. Swaminathan is such a strong voice for bringing climate resilience into the food production system. And that voice has been heard, and there have been some incredible policy changes. And I started working on this maybe, 10 years ago, and I would have never dreamed that there could be such a rapid recognition of millets, which were previously not getting research support, not getting attention, considered a low status cereal, dropping out of production, that there could be such a turnaround at a high level. So in the 2013 National Food Security Act, which guarantees food security, very important act, the watershed change there was recognizing that coarse grains are considered a food grain, along with rice and wheat. So that means that these coarse grains, millets, as they were then called, could be in the public distribution system, could be in procurement systems, could be in receive a minimum support price, be considered a food grain along with rice and wheat. And in fact, some states, including Karnataka, do now have millets in their public distribution system. So this is really a watershed change in the recognition that coarse grains, the millets, have a place in the Indian production and consumption along with rice and wheat. And then another watershed is in this 2018, which recognizes that changes the way we refer to millets from a kind of low status coarse cereals to recognize them as nutricereals for both their, it says here, unique nutritional characteristics and their climate resilience. So that is a real, as I said, I never would have thought that this kind of policy change would happen, not just in India, but anywhere, would happen so rapidly, and it really has caught the attention. So you probably all saw that there were millets in the White House menu when the Prime Minister came a few weeks ago. So it has really permeated at high levels. So then the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, we have this high-level policy attention. How does that translate to the ground? What does it take to turn these words about the importance of millets for climate resilience and nutrition into actual change on the ground, into actual decisions about what farmers grow, decisions about what people eat? How do you bridge that gap between these big statements about the importance of millets to what actually happened? So for here, I'm going to go to the place that I know the best, which is in Madhya Pradesh in central India, which is one of the strongholds of the native small millets, kutki and kodo. This is a part of the country that is so globally treasured for its tiger habitat. That's how I first got to love this landscape, but I love it also for its millets. And this is an area where there is still, very much so, millets are still produced and still in the cultural memory, although you can see them rapidly declining. So how do we know what's going on the ground? You know, we can read all these policy statements, but how do we really know how this high-level policy is translating to the ground? There's really only one way to know, and that is to go to the ground and to learn from farmers and to try to understand why they make the decisions they do, how they perceive millets, how they're growing millets, what are the barriers to producing more millets, what are they eating, and to listen to the people who are closest to the ground and are so incredibly knowledgeable on what will grow well and why they make decisions that they do. So when we go to the ground in this part of the country, and I don't want to generalize everywhere because we all know how heterogeneous the country is, but when we ask about the barriers, or we asked previously, what did they used to grow millets? And you'll hear, hampele ugatite. You'll hear that a lot. You'll hear hampele katite. You'll hear that a lot. But but you could see that it's dropping out of the diet and what farmers want to grow. So we asked them why. Why is this? You used to have more diets, more millets in your diet, and more millets in what you're growing in your fields. Why not? And the most common answer is that they'll say, zamin nahi hai. They don't have land available. So what happened to that land where they were previously growing millets? Millets grows on well-drained, at least these kinds of millets, grow on well-drained, sloping land. They won't grow in a paddy. There's too much water there and it's not drained. So what we see over and over again is that there has been quite a bit of land that has been converted, previously growing millets, to paddy to be able to grow rice. And that is quite sensible from the farmer's point of view, very sensible, because rice is getting more income. Farmers can sell to the government, it will get procured, it has a minimum support price, and it makes a lot of economic sense. But in the meantime, this land is being taken out of millet cultivation. And we learned a lot from these farmers who told us about this, that in the Manrega scheme, which is incredibly important for employment security, where below poverty level rural farmers are guaranteed a set number of days a year of labor. There's a long list of permissible works, and one of the activities that is included in permissible works for Manrega is the construction of paddy, construction of the bunds, and the construction of to be able to grow rice. So these farmers told us that 15 or so years ago there was a panchayat scheme that had where they're standing now, they were previously growing millets, but that's been now converted into paddy. And this is still continuing today. So we have this high-level policy attention on millets, but then we have these leftover policies that are incentivizing in the other direction. So how do we think about bridging those kinds of gaps? Then when we ask about whether people are eating millets and why they don't eat millets like they did in, say, in the previous generation, although it's still very much there in cultural memory, and a lot of people are still eating millets in this particular landscape. But why is it dropping out of the diet? So one of the often hear this is data from asking in some particular tessels, but the point is that almost everyone is processing the millets at home. So millets have a very thick husk, so they can store for a long time, which is why they're known as famine foods, because they can store for many, many years without going bad. But they're hard to process, because you have to dehusk them. So the traditional way of dehusking is like what this gentleman is doing right here, to pound it with a stone. That is a lot of work and takes hours and hours out of the day. And that's generally work that women do. In this case, we see a man doing it, but he's just demonstrating the process. That is a lot of drudgery, a lot to ask for people to do to be able to process the millets. But there is technology available for processing. This here is a kind of pretty simple sieve. You need a different size sieve than the rice and the wheat because the size of the seed is different. So a small processing unit. So the technology is there. It's not a very sophisticated technology. It's there, but not accessible and not available. So we have the chakkis and the rice processing units. Those are very, very ubiquitous, but not to process millets. So that is one of the barriers that people point to a lot as the reason why they don't want to eat more millets that they're growing at home. And to purchase them is obviously prohibitively expensive for these farmers to be able to purchase processed millets. And then a really strong reason is that people aren't eating more millets or growing more millets is because the public distribution system, which again is extremely important for food security, something like 40% of the population relies on the public distribution system, so extremely important. But that's where rice, and sometimes wheat, is highly subsidized. So then, of course, the incentive is to rely on inexpensive rice and not millets. And again, some states, Orissa, some sure you know, Karnataka, are introducing millets into their public distribution systems, which is really interesting to see. So we put all this information together and we see that there are many barriers to bridging that gap between the high-level policy and what actually happens on the ground. So the challenge now is to try to figure out how to overcome those barriers. Low yields and the lack of breeding to improve yields is certainly an enormous issue. The labor requirements, the lack of market chains, even though millets now have a minimum support price, the government is unsure procurement. So all these issues play together on the consumption side, the drudgery, the continued perception that these coarse grains are somehow lower status and the aspirational cereal is white rice, the availability of highly subsidized rice, food safety, a lot of issues are barriers. So how do we think about overcoming these barriers? And I think that it's possible, but it certainly takes attention and commitment. So the other aspect of this very exciting millet revival is to think back about the Green Revolution. Important for increasing production and alleviating famine, no doubt about that. But there's a lot to be learned from the Green Revolution that can be applied to this potential millet revolution. And one is to keep the genetic diversity alive. Genetic diversity is like keeping the options for breeding, climate resilience, pest resilience. It's just the basis for healthy food systems is to have the genetic diversity staying alive. And we know that in the Green Revolution, there were thousands of varieties of rice that fell out of production with the attention on high-yielding hybrid rice. So a lot of genetic diversity was lost. And now that genetic diversity, which contained most likely very good traits for climate resilience, pest resilience, waterlogging, all kinds of traits that are important today, is now lost to us. So how do we ensure that that does not happen with the millets, especially the small millets, which are not so easily commercialized like the ragi, bajra, and jawar? How to keep that alive. Another learning from the Green Revolution is about ensuring that the benefits, both for income and for nutrition, are equitably shared across the spectrum. So we know one of the learnings from the Green Revolution is that those who benefited the most are those who could afford the inputs of agrochemicals, pesticides, water, buy the seeds, all of those inputs, and those were who could benefit the most. So how do we assure that these benefits are equitably shared? Another issue is one of the reasons why millets are so highly valued and getting all this attention is because they are so nutritious. They have the iron, they have zinc, they have all the micronutrients, low glycemic index, all of these good things that we hear about millets. And as millets become more and more commercialized, we see more and more processed products. And I'm sure you're seeing this in the stores and everywhere, that there's lots of products now that are being made out of millets, which is great. But how do we make sure that the nutrients are retained in those products so that the benefit of the millets is realized? So there's quite a lot to try to connect, try to think about this scaling up from the ground to achieve these high-level policy objectives. And as Harini said, I started out my career very much high in the sky with remote sensing and satellite data and looking down on the world. And I've come to realize more and more that the real truth lies in being able to be on the ground and understand what is happening and then try to connect with the higher level. So there are a lot of challenges, but I'd say if we think back to the process of adaptation, learning, and changing course, it is as true in Harappan civilization as it is today. And the key to being able to adapt lies in keeping our diversity alive. And this is the most recent book where I'm asking, what do we learn from nature about how civilization can be less focused on efficiency and more focused on what has enabled nature to survive for millions and millions of years, because there's a lot of wisdom there and has survived for a lot longer than we have. And one of the chief mechanisms that has enabled nature to survive for so long is diversity, even though it seems like it would be inefficient, or it seems like let's just go for high-yielding crops and monoculture to produce a lot. But what has enabled nature to survive is keeping that diversity alive. So we're learning that from history, and we are learning that from our present day. So with that, I will thank you and look forward to some good discussion.